Tomorrow is Remembrance Day, an emotional and deeply personal day for many Canadians. Millions of people across the country wear the poppy every year to mark it.
The reason I'm wearing a poppy is for Remembrance Day, to remember the fallen, the veterans that served our country. My father was in the Army, so in World War II, so yeah, it does mean something.
Remember, we want to celebrate, well, not celebrate, but honor the soldiers that died for our country.
Just to remember the soldiers. I think it's important for her to know, being so young, that she needs to carry that on into the future.
As the name suggests, it's for remembrance, because we gotta know our history to go forward in the future.
My grandfather was in both World Wars. If it wasn't for those guys, we wouldn't have this country we have today.
Ginette Petitpas Taylor is the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Minister, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
What does Remembrance Day mean to you? Do you think of a family member who served at this time of year?
It's a very solemn occasion for sure for many Canadians, and for me as well. I have several family members that have served and continue to serve. So it's really a time of reflection, a time for me to think of their sacrifice that they've made, and to thank the many men and women that have served this country and that are still serving today. I
wanted to play you some tape of Howard McNamara. He flew Spitfire fighters over Italy during the Second World War. Amazing guy. Have a listen.
Remembrance Day is history. We went through a war, and the younger generation don't learn that in school. When we went to school, we learned about history, and it seems the younger people don't realize.
So that gentleman is 103 years old, served in the Second World War. He's making the point that maybe not enough Canadians know about our history of service and what our veterans did for us. Is there something to be said for that? Is he right that maybe people don't know enough about our history?
I think it's a big part of the work that we need to do. We need to make sure that we continue to share those stories, and that is through our young people as well. I know that over the past few weeks I met with several young individuals, students in schools, that are really paying special tributes to veterans. They're making a point to meet with veterans, and that is really, really important, because if we want those stories to continue on, we have to make sure that they're going to be taught, and that we're going to have individuals that will be able to share those stories for years and decades to come.
Yeah, there was an Ipsos Read poll out just recently, really interesting data about Remembrance Day and veterans, and they found actually that more Canadians know about U.S. military history than Canadian military history. That seems problematic to me. It says that there might be a shortcoming somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we need to certainly know our history before we know other countries' history. And again, I think that we all have a role to play when it comes to that. In our education system as well, we certainly, I know when I went to school, we certainly had history classes and we learned about the different wars. But again, I think that we all have to take it upon us and take that responsibility on to make sure that we educate our children and our grandchildren, and again, to make sure that those stories are not forgotten, because we certainly often know that these individuals that have served in these times are not going to be with us forever, and we need to make sure that we carry on their stories and their legacy.
I want to ask you about the Veterans Benefits backlog as well. You've made significant progress as a government. You've really whittled it down to where it was, but there are still about 5,000 applications pending that need to be reviewed by Veterans Affairs Canada. Where are we with that backlog, and why is it taking so long for so many folks that really need support from this government?
Really, really good question. We certainly have made huge progress when it comes to the backlog. Just last Friday, actually, I was in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, where we announced an additional $164 million to help sustain 650 employees that are working on that backlog for the next 2 years. So again, we're not going to stop until that we meet our service standards, and we are certainly making tremendous, tremendous progress with respect to that. Why are we dealing with the backlog, though? It's a really good question that you ask. Since we formed government, we've invested in an additional $11 billion in additional services and support for veterans. And as a result, we've seen a 61% increase in people applying for benefits through Veterans Affairs Canada. So as a result, we're seeing a substantive amount of new cases that are coming in. And as such, that's why that we found ourselves with a backlog. But again, we are addressing it, and we are certainly, in a very good position to make sure that we meet our service standards in the very, very near future.
You speak about service standards. I think it's 80% of applications will be processed in 16 weeks,
Correct.
Right? So that still means 20% of people will not see any service for more than 4 months. I mean, that still seems like a long time to wait, especially if you're a veteran in need, doesn't it?
I completely appreciate that, but I think we also have to recognize that there's some cases that are a bit more complex and that we need more analysis. Sometimes we need more medical reports, whatever the case may be. So depending on some cases, we're going to see that the analysis will be done in a very, very quick matter, that it won't even take 16 weeks. But again, there are some more complex matters that take a bit more time. And again, we want to make sure that the assessment is done appropriately to make sure that the veterans have access to all the benefits that they're entitled to.
Some folks really do depend on those benefits, and we see that there are consequences for people having to wait, some human consequences. I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but recently in Edmonton, a food bank there that serves veterans alone reported that the number of clients they're serving has quadrupled since they opened their doors 3 years ago. They're now serving 160 veterans a day, people who really need access to food. What do you say to those folks? Are you able to help veterans food banks like this? Can you give them some more money, some more support to kind of get through these tough times?
Well, once again, I think that it's very important to make sure that, first of all, veterans that are veterans get in touch with Veterans Affairs Canada to make sure that they know what services that they qualify for. Believe it or not, there's some individuals that have served this country that don't even know and don't consider themselves veterans. I'll use an example. A few years ago, I had gone out on a walk with Vets Canada in my community in Moncton, and we were just looking for individuals that perhaps were living on the streets or, were living rough, let's say. And during the training or that orientation session, they indicated to me, Ginette, just make sure that just don't ask them if they're a veteran. Ask them if they ever served in uniform, because many of them, just because that perhaps they didn't serve a long period of time, don't consider themselves veterans. So for us and for your viewers this evening, I guess first and foremost, if anyone has served and if they need help, make sure that first and foremost they get in touch with Veterans Affairs Canada. Then from there to meet with a case manager, and we can see what services are available to them. Also in that situation, the example that you provided as well. If some veterans are facing some difficulties as well, we do have some emergency funds that sometimes they can qualify for as well. And that doesn't take very long at all. It can only take a few days really. But first and foremost, they have to get in touch with Veterans Affairs. Then from there, we can do the assessment and get them the help that they need.
Do you have any data on how many veterans may qualify for benefits but haven't applied? Like, is it a sizable number?
Again, we don't have that number. Again, when people serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, some of them leave, at a very young age, and if they don't ask for services immediately, we don't have a way to really contact them. They have to really reach out to the department, and that continues to be kind of an issue, I think, that I've seen. And getting a better communication plan out there and making sure that people are aware is really, really important.
Yeah, speaking of sleeping rough and data, it's really hard to get a number on how many homeless veterans there are. I think for the reasons you just said, some folks don't necessarily identify themselves as such when surveyed by people who do this sort of work. But the best estimate I can find is about 3,000 folks are homeless veterans on the streets of this country. Is there something more you can do? One thing I think is really interesting, in the United States, a lot of states exempt property taxes for disabled veterans. I know in this country you've been trying to roll out a rental supplement program, but is there something, and I know this isn't necessarily federal responsibility, but is there something more you can do maybe on property taxes for vets don't lose their homes? Those are going up with the cost of housing as well. Maybe that's something that the government could look at.
And again, those are the types of conversations that I think that we have to continue to have. I think that everyone has a role to play when it comes to housing. I think we all recognize that the province as well has a role when it comes to property taxes and the rest of it. So I certainly can't speak on their behalf as to what they're prepared to do. But when it comes to veterans homelessness, in the last budget, we did announce $79 million. And we are just in the process right now of making the analyzing the applications that have come through. So that from there we can provide the monies to the different organizations. And as you've indicated, we certainly want to make sure that through this fund that we'll be able to provide rent supplements to veterans, but also to make sure that we are able to provide the wraparound services that they do need as well. We want to set up our veterans for success, and sometimes they do need additional help and support, let it be for substance use and addictions or whatever wraparound services they need. So the monies that we have put aside will be doing just that, rent supplements and also wraparound services. And again, it may look different in different communities. The reality perhaps in Atlantic Canada is perhaps different than out west. So we can't have a cookie cutter approach when it comes to housing. We really, again, want to meet the veterans where they're at and to provide them with the help that they need in the time that they need it.
Because I think you'd probably admit 3,000 vets on the streets, that's not a good number. We don't want to see that.
One veteran on the street is not a good number. They have served our country and we need to be there for them in their time of need.
Canadians don't necessarily agree on everything, but they do agree on one thing, and that's our vets. And I think that's really quite touching. When I just referenced that Ipsos poll earlier, 85% of people surveyed said we need to do more to honor our veterans. And one way to honor our veterans is to build an Afghan memorial in Ottawa. I know this has been on your file. It's been very active. There's been some controversy about the pick for what the actual memorial will be, but I don't necessarily want to harp on that. You can mention it if you want, but I think what I'm trying to get to is, why has it taken so long? I mean, this government has been in power now for 8 years. The Conservative government first pitched it before you. The timeline to have it actually built is still some years off. Are we letting our Afghan veterans down by not having something in place? They've been waiting so long to have some sort of place here in the nation's capital.
I'm as impatient as you are about this, and I think it's been a long process. The process started in 2015 when the previous government was in power. They chose a site, and the veterans were not pleased with the site that was chosen. Therefore, we found a new location where the monument will be erected, and from there we started the consultation process. We've heard from veterans. We've heard them loud and clear which concept that they wanted to see selected, and as such we made the decision as a government in order to choose that concept. We've actually signed the contract, or the national the NCC has signed the contract with the proponent now, and the work will hopefully be on the way in the very, very near future. And as you've said, we want to make sure that we have a place to honor our Afghan veterans, and in order to ensure as well that the Afghan veterans have an area where they can go and again, to pay respect to their, lost comrades, and also to the fellow Canadians that they served with.
Because veterans aren't just older folks, right? There are people my age, people not much older than me, who also need to be honored, right?
And I'm happy that you mentioned that, because a part of my responsibility, and one of my priorities, I should say, is really doing a better job at commemorating our modern-day veterans. As you've indicated, a lot of the veterans that we see nowadays, when they're exiting the Canadian Armed Forces, are leaving at a very young age, and many of them have other careers afterwards ahead of them. But we still have to recognize the work that they've done in different missions around the world. We have to do a better job at commemorating those folks, and that is certainly a priority of mine. I've indicated to you before the show, I've got several family members that have served in different missions, and I see the toll that it's taken on them and on their families. Their families have served with them, and it's important that we commemorate them and to thank them for their service.
Well, thank you for your time today. Ginette Petitpas-Taylor, the Minister of Veterans Affairs, I really appreciate you coming in to share your stories.
Thank you.
As I was discussing with the minister, a recent poll on Remembrance Day found 85% of respondents think Canada should do more to honor its veterans, and 87% think Canada should be doing more to educate young people about Canada's military history. This was a poll conducted by Ipsos on behalf of Historica Canada. For more insight into what these numbers tell us, I'm joined by Anthony Wilson-Smith, President and CEO of Historica Canada. Sir, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So these poll numbers suggest there's a rare consensus among Canadians. Nearly everyone polled said we should teach our young people about military history. And yet most provinces do not require high school students take a Canadian history course before graduating. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's only 3 out of the 13 provinces and territories that have a full, Canadian history course per se. And of course, within that, you're then trying to cover about 100 and whatever it is now, 156 years. Never mind the thousands of years of Indigenous presence before that. So, and then getting to war campaigns within that is just a tiny fraction. So sure, it's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, only 3 of the 10 provinces, that's what you said? Only 3 of them require this?
Yeah, there are some that will tell you that they do it under the aegis of, for example, of sociology, or it touches in with other things. But there are only 3 that do a full, here is Canadian history, that's what it's called, that's what you're going to do.
Maybe that explains this next question. Almost half of Canadians surveyed in this poll that we're referencing knew more about American military history than Canadian military history. What does that tell you?
It tells you a lot of people still go to see Saving Private Ryan. It says that, Hollywood and television and all the enormous presence in Netflix and otherwise, you see some Canadian, films, but we're just overwhelmed by it. And the American culture is a much more effectively military culture than ours. It's, we do what we can. We do our heritage minutes. Other people do lots of things on this, but it's the old, Pierre Trudeau, First Prime Minister Trudeau saying, a mouse sleeping next to an elephant, and that applies in these terms as well.
Fair enough. 85% of those surveyed think Canada needs to do more to honor our veterans. That's overwhelming support. Politicians would love to have numbers like that. What do you suggest we do to honor our veterans?
build a memorial in Ottawa to Afghan veterans, as you were just saying just now. It's if there's a site, and it's it shouldn't be that hard to reach agreement. It's a great beginning step. Talk to the provinces and find out why there isn't more teaching in schools. Fund some places that will do more within this, and make sure the military, the first person people have more chance to tell their stories, because you don't get much of that as well. There's a pretty hard lid kept on military veterans or present serving people speaking about their experiences, and no one does it better than they do.
You wanted to mention something about peacekeeping, I understand, too. Tell me what you're thinking about with Remembrance Day tomorrow.
Yeah, there's two things. First of all, this is the 75th anniversary of Canadians serving as peacekeepers. Whenever you poll, when we poll and other people do, it always shows up as one of the things which Canadians are most proud of, peacekeeping presence in the world. We've had we've been peacekeepers and peacemakers, which is very tough. It's a very different set of skills. We do it very well. And so we've lost 130 people in that line. In the kind of fractious world in which we're living right now, of course, we always want to pay respect to World War II veterans, but the dangers these people undergo when they're out there are every bit as formidable.
Another interesting figure is that more Canadians are making an effort to attend official Remembrance Day services. The numbers are even higher than pre-pandemic levels. What do you think is driving all that interest?
I think it's two things. First of all, there's an awareness that the average military, World War II veteran, which we feel so strongly, is either closing in on 100 or slightly past that. Of course, that means very few are left, and we're losing them literally by the week. The other is, frankly, that, we live in a multicultural country, as we know, with many advantages to that, but also the world has come to our doorstep, including those problems. We're much more aware that, it's 78 years since World War II. Not 1 year has passed without war in some dark corner of the world taking place. And we now, as we have people from so many societies, we understand that firsthand in ways we didn't before. And unfortunately, the demonstrations we see over the last couple of weeks, Israel, Palestine, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, Russia, Ukraine, all of those exist right here in this country as well. And that makes us think about it too.
So we know from these numbers that more people want young people to know about Canadian history. We know that people want more to be done to honor our veterans. And we know that more people are interested in Remembrance Day services than perhaps in a generation. What does that tell you? And what are you going to the government and saying? Do we need to have a reset as how do we approach this issue?
It tells me that it's very good about young people. I was very, very happy to see those numbers. If you consider the fact that, for example, if you were 15 years old in 1985, a World War II veteran could have been your hockey coach, your school teacher, the bank manager for your parents, the person next door. It was very much a part of everyday life. That same person who was 15 then is now in their early 50s, and that 60-something veteran is now approaching 100 or no longer with us. So for 30-somethings or 20-somethings to get that sense of awareness that they show really speaks well to their level of engagement in this issue and of their level of respect. And that's something government really should be listening to, of course, because, this is the generation of today, of tomorrow. We're not talking about some dusty old thing to be put away soon somewhere, but rather a concern that's going to keep echoing over the ages.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much to Anthony Wilson-Smith, the President and CEO of Historica Canada. Thanks for your time, sir.
My pleasure.
Canadians who have served and are serving in the military will be honored tomorrow on Remembrance Day, and CBC News will have special live coverage from the National War Memorial. Our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, will be hosting. It begins at 10 a.m. Eastern on CBC Gem, CBC TV, and right here on CBC News Network.